A shakeup at City Hall. Democrats grab a supervisor seat, and SDSU wins the stadium fight. The new local landscape after the election. At the state level, Gavin Newsom is in, Prop 6 is out, and now opponents of the gas tax are threatening a recall. In Congress, the 49th finally flipped while Duncan Hunter kept his seat, but a bigger threat to his career may be weeks away. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, Scott Lewis, CEO, Editor-in-Chief of Voice of San Diego, reporter Allison St. John, who covers North County for KPBS, Michael Smolens, columnist for the San Diego Union Tribune, and investigative reporter Amitha Sharma of KPBS News. Well, historic change played out Tuesday night for the San Diego City Council. Women are in the majority, Democrats enjoy a supermajority, and an incumbent lost, two of them in fact, for the first time in nearly 3 decades. So Scott, start right there. Who's new, who's out, and why such a big deal?
Well, yeah, incumbents don't lose, but 2 of them did. We're looking at a new representative for the coastal area, District 2, Pacific Beach, Mission Beach, OB, Point Loma. That's Jen Campbell, and first-time candidate, did really well. She's won by 12% or so, 12 points. New one in District 4, Monica Montgomery, ousted the council president, Myrtle Cole. Myrtle Cole had the support of the labor unions and the support of Mayor Kevin Faulconer, who worked really hard to block anti-spending against her, but also to raise money for her. Every establishment piece she could have, she had, but she lost. Monica Montgomery, fierce, just great candidate, had a great connection with the community she's in. And it looks like, although it's a little still too close to call, in District 8, David Alvarez has been replaced. He didn't get thrown out, he was termed out, but his deputy, Vivian Moreno, has pulled out what looks like the victory in the South Bay area. And
Lori Zaff was going for a 3rd term. It was quirky, and we won't get into the weeds on that, but what happened? They just, time for a change?
Yeah, you know, that race got nationalized in a way I don't think people quite realize. They're very similar on the local issues there. But the whole Trump thing, even she, you know, the people supported her, ran against Trump, said like, oh, you know, she's different. She stood against him on offshore drilling and stuff like that. And then the Democrats, especially led by the building trades unions, just poured money into that district, tying her to Trump, but then also bringing up some old statements about gay folks and others that were very controversial that she had repudiated, but not clear enough. A lot of things sort of just weighted her down, and it was a brutal, just a drubbing. She probably lost by about 13 points, and really stunning. That's a more Democratic district than before, but it's just shocking to see an incumbent fall that much.
Yeah. And Michael, Scott was alluding to there, Kevin Faulconer wasn't on the ballot, but it wasn't a great night for the mayor.
Well, no. I mean, he was an ally, or Lori Zaff was a strong ally of his. He supported her, campaigned for her, and Myrtle Cole, I mean, he helped engineer her to become council president while she's a Democrat. They worked closely together. She did cross him up on some key votes over time, but he appeared in her district a lot, over the years. And so it was a tough one. But on the flip side, it was kind of a nuanced mixed bag for labor. They supported 2 Democratic candidates that did not win. If Vivian Moreno holds on, they supported her opponent, Antonio Martinez, and they also supported Myrtle Cole against Monica Montgomery. That's not to say that Monica Montgomery and Vivian Moreno aren't going to vote like Democrats, but there's a lot of nonpartisan. It's not always a partisan vote on the council, and so at least going in, you'd think they don't owe anything to the mayor, and they don't really owe much to labor at this stage. Now, they're Democrats; they want a future, and you'd figure that they're going to make up and so forth, but things got a little ugly. You had the Democratic and Labor, backing that sent mailers or posted things accusing them basically of being Trump Republicans, which is, kind of weird for fellow Democrats. It's one thing to choose sides. So there was a lot of mixed results in that respect.
Yeah. Well, Scott, what's the major issues now that this new supermajority of Democrats on the council are going to?
Well, there's some short-term ones and long-term. In the short term, there's 2 big decisions right now. First is who's going to be the council president. Myrtle Cole's out now. The council president's a huge job. It's a very important and influential position.
Sets the agenda.
Yeah, exactly. So that could be a very powerful post, and we've seen what people can do with that. And Todd Gloria was there for a while. So that decision will come up in the next few weeks. A lot of people are talking about, well, Chris Ward wants it, Barbara Bree wants it. Georgette Gomez now has a lot of cachet because she supported Vivian Moreno. She was one of the only folks who really worked hard for Vivian Moreno and out of that establishment. So she now has a chance, I think, to become council president, which she's already the chair of MTS. That short-term, another short-term one is the mayor going to get his special election for a convention center, a tax increase on hotels that would fund expansion of the convention center and fund some homeless services.
Could have another election coming up here.
Yeah, so the big decision right now is, does he want to try to get that on the ballot before the new city council takes its place? And so that could happen in the next few weeks, assuming he can get the votes from his current council. Then the long-term issue is, what are they going to do with this supermajority? There's all kinds of national examples of very progressive legislation, tax increases, affordable housing expenditures, bonds, all kinds of things, public banks. What are they going to do with this supermajority? They won't say yet. We'll see how that goes.
Fascinating. Allison?
I was just going to ask whether the mayor has also been weakened by the result of the Soccer City vote. Will that affect any
Right, he backed
political
Soccer City
ambitions
too, yeah.
He did, and the UT called him a lame duck in the editorial board. He's still got more than 2 years in office, so that's a pretty hefty slur right now. But I think that the situation is, yes, he did support that, and this development of this plot of land was decided by the voters and not by him. He didn't have any influence on that. Now he has a chance, though, to structure an agreement with SDSU. It's an unprecedented negotiation they have to go after.
Yeah, that was the other big spotlight issue here. What's going to happen with Soccer City?
Just getting to the mayor in that situation, it was odd. He chose the wrong horse early on in that battle, and a lot of people thought he might back off. He was sort of non-existent in the campaign, but he never did withdraw his support for Soccer City. And to be honest, I don't know that anybody that would admit this or say this, but I will. I think he probably was better off that Soccer City lost, because the entire, and Scott and I have talked about this on various occasions, really almost the entire San Diego establishment, left, right, business, labor, education, was on board with the San Diego State West, SDSU West proposal. If Soccer City had won, I think that people would be less forgiving of the mayor for sticking with them than they are now. The day after, he embraced Measure G, the SDSU West. He met with President De La Torre of SDSU and was pictured with her wearing the I Am SDSU scarves. So he's getting on board. It's his job, now that the people have spoken, to negotiate a deal. So yeah. I think if this goes smoothly, a lot of people aren't going to care or remember what he endorsed.
Well, a lot of challenges. How are we going to get this through here?
And can he effectively negotiate a deal when he's not... He doesn't have the same kind of conviction for it that maybe other supporters did.
I think he's going to get that conviction fast. But they have a lot of big challenges. This is one of the city's most valuable pieces of land. It's actually owned in part by the Water Department, which has a very significant responsibility to protect assets for the water that we need in the region. And so getting the money from SDSU to pay for this fair market value for this land is a huge issue. They promised to get it done within 4 years. They promised to build a river park and a stadium within that time period. Honestly, they're kind of like the dog that caught the car. They got it. They went after it.
Now what do we do?
Now they're stuck with something that's a very big responsibility. There's going to be tremendous pressure on both the city and SDSU to come out with something, and boy, I would love to be part of those negotiations. I would just
be in the room,
pop some popcorn, and watch it. Yeah.
Before we leave our local segment, I want to get into the county supervisors. Nathan Fletcher finally got a win here after running a few times. Only Democrat on this board here. Not really a surprise, but will he have an impact as the lone Democrat?
This will test the proposition that you can be a leader without necessarily having the actual power of the votes. Can he, frame conversations, frame discussions in a way that brings people along? A lot of people think he might be able to, about really unleashing some of the county's dollars to help with mental health and homeless issues. That's a position you can sit in for a while and not make a lot of noise and to be just fine. So he won 65% to 35% at least, just a total drubbing. The employee groups there are going to be knocking on his door, though, a lot. They came to bat for him, unlike any union in town for any candidate. I mean, just worked hard to get him to that primary. And they'll expect him to be not only just a good vote for them, but a leader on their issues. Like, they want him to really lead a whole reframing of how benefits work, about all the tasks that the county does on health and human services, welfare, things like that. It's going to be fascinating.
And just one final note, you mentioned about the size of the victory. I mean, that's what incumbent supervisors have been doing for 2 decades against nobodies. He ran against what a lot of people thought was a very popular district attorney who was there for, 15 years, I think, give or take?
Judge
Bonnie Dumanis, and a judge. So, I mean, the breadth of that win was really something. And you sort of wonder, does that help him not just squeaking by, but convincingly win in the core city of San Diego district?
Well, what's their big items, Allison?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that we had 2 supervisors elected, and of course one was in the North County where Jim Desmond is replacing Bill Horn. And if you see Nathan Fletcher as sort of the face of the new Board of Supervisors, Jim Desmond is like epitome of the old boys network. I mean, he is going to continue the tradition of the existing board. And last night, not last night, but election night, he was like speaking like a Republican leader. So we have had very little focus on him, but I think he's going to be, the continuation of that more conservative point of view into the future.
All right, fascinating, and we'll lots to talk about as we go forward here in the coming months. Well, we're going to move on to the state. California has a new governor as Democrats remain in control in Sacramento. Republican quest to draw their voters with their repeal the gas tax battle cry, that fizzled. So, Meetha, start with Gavin Newsom here. Big victory over Republican John Cox of Rancho Santa Fe. No surprise here. Good news for climate change.
Good news for climate change. I mean, in a state that where Democratic voter registration outnumbers Republican voter registration by 20%. Newsom's election is no surprise. On the issue of climate change, it's a big boon. I think he goes a little bit further than Governor Brown does on some issues. He is against fracking in natural gas and oil exploration. He's in favor of California getting 100% of its energy from renewable sources by 2050. He wants a carbon-free state, no carbon emissions. He's also talked about creating a state agency where you would research energy innovation. He's against offshore drilling, and those lawsuits that we've seen between the Trump administration and California over environmental policy will likely continue.
Can he inject climate change into the national discussion? Because here's another election cycle, at least on the national level, it really didn't appear much.
Well, I think
despite this big UN report right in the middle of the election season saying that, the planet, you got 10 years here, we're in dire trouble.
I think he's counting it. I think he thinks he can be a global leader on this issue. He has said numerous times that the country and the world is looking to California for leadership on these kinds of issues.
Well, now, might as well throw the obvious question out, after 2 years, does he become a candidate in the national discussion where the Democrats have...
Anybody that's governor of California is obviously going to be looked at one way or another, but, it sounds demeaning, and I don't want to say that the global warming issue is the nice, shiny object, but he's got a lot facing him here in California. That's part of it. That's a huge part of it, but... Governor Brown was able to, his heft politically and his knowledge, and frankly, his sort of a tight-fisted, conservative fiscal view compared to the Democratic legislature was a big reason why things work. Will Gavin Newsom be able to, impose that kind of discipline? We've seen other governors. Governor Gray Davis gave in to a lot of what the Democratic legislature wanted and didn't work out well for him. The state is in very good financial shape now, largely because of tax increases and protecting from the gas tax repeal.
The rainy day fund.
But we'll just have to see, how he works in that regard, because there's a lot of issues. The pension time bomb is ticking at the state level. We talk about the need for housing, and Governor Brown will go down in history, I think, as having a very good second round as governor, but he wasn't able to do anything about the California Environmental Quality Act, which I think a lot of people, even that support it, thinks it needs updating because there's just too much slowness in the whole development process, and we need housing like crazy.
Well, Newsom has a really ambitious agenda. On the issue of housing, he wants to get 3.5 million new housing units built over the next decade or so by using incentives like boosting affordable housing tax credits and disincentives like withholding transportation dollars. On the issue of poverty, he wants to focus his efforts on childhood poverty by expanding programs in prenatal care, Head Start, and he wants to get universal preschool. And on the issue of homelessness, he has talked about bringing in an agency director at the cabinet level who would think about ways, come up with solutions on getting people off the street, and he wants to streamline all the social services that treat homeless people. So the big question is, coming back to your statement, where does the money come from? He has said he not only wants to preserve California's $9 billion surplus, he wants to grow it. So he's talked about perhaps more partnerships between the federal government and local communities in getting that money.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that gas tax, Prop 6. It was supposed to be a big boon to get Republicans out to the polls, and you saw a lot of signs here, a lot of effort here, because Carl DeMaio, of course, the former councilman, was pushing it, but it didn't do well at all. That money is going to remain with the state coffers. What happened on Prop?
I mean, as someone who drives down I-5,
yes, you do.
I think just the traffic right there, people realize, look, if we're going to cut off that tax, maybe it will affect our ability to improve our road system, and it's something we all experience every day.
Yeah, his argument was, of course, that the state ballot measure was actually misleading on the document, that it said, you know, this would just take away money for transportation. But I think part of his problem was that he made it more than just the gas tax. He made it also a restriction on future gas tax. You would have had to get a 2/3 vote to pass a future gas tax. And so with major issues like that in one ballot measure, arranging it on the ballot is yeah, sure, it can be capricious and maybe even, you know, monkeyed with a little bit, but it is the way it is, and you can't, that's the game, and he lost the game. But also, there is another side to tax increases, and that's the investment that they make. And when you talk about that being pulled away, that was obviously a turnoff. And so, but the one thing I think that did happen, the Republicans worked to get it on the ballot, but they didn't do a lot to really champion it after that.
Campaign. Well, that does set up a bite we have from DeMaio, who's not happy about the whole turnout here. Let's hear that.
You know, to our Attorney General, let me just remind you, I know you're not a good lawyer, but let me remind you of one simple fact on the law. You may have been able to slap a false and misleading title on a citizen's initiative, but you can't change the title on a recall election, buddy.
Sour grapes there, or what do you think, Amita?
Well, I mean, he had said before Election Day that if this measure, Prop 6, goes down, that he would seek a recall against Attorney General Javier Becerra. How successful it might be, whether he actually follows through, I don't know. But he is angry. He's very upset about the title of the ballot. He wanted it to say gas tax repeal initiative. Instead, it said Prop 6 would, or Prop 6 eliminates certain road repair and transportation dollars. He said that's dirty pool. It's misleading. It's confusing. But at the end of the day, coming back to both of your points, I mean, I think Californians didn't mind paying that extra 12 cents per gallon.
Because we all drive here, and it's not great.
Right, and you didn't just have transportation advocates and labor unions pushing to maintain this tax, but you also had pro-business groups who said, look, this boosts the economy, it boosts jobs.
Right.
It is sour grapes. If the Attorney General leaves office, it's not going to be because of an initiative or a recall by Carl DeMaio. It's a very expensive proposition. They were successful. I believe it was a state senator who supported the gas tax. They were able to recall him. A statewide campaign is a far different thing, and they didn't do a very good job on this one. They just didn't have the resources to battle. The other side had huge resources. I don't know that you'd see that coming to Becerra's defense, but there was that aspect. And, you know, Carl DeMaio, you know, has been forever talking about pushing statewide pension reform, and that hasn't been able to get off the ground. So, you know, at some point, you know, at what point is this a bit not working for him, exactly. I guess.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to we got a little bit of time left. I wish we had more in the hour today, but the blue wave Democrats hope for arrived, though it was not a tsunami. Democrats regained the House of Representatives and the power to check Donald Trump. It was a big night for women, especially women of color and members of the LGBTQ community. Locally, the Flip the 49th phenomena bore fruit. Allison, start there. Darrell Issa is going to be replaced by a Democrat.
It's a huge change for this district, which stretches up all the coastal cities, from a man who was the richest man in Congress because of car alarms, something to protect private property, to a man who is an environmental attorney and is talking a lot about sustainable energy. So major shift here. And And I think that we have to give some credit to the Flip the 49th campaign. Even although the demographics of the district have changed, there were still more registered Republicans in that district. And they really got out there. They knocked on 57,000 doors. They actually convinced 16,000 low-propensity voters to go to the polls. So there was a huge effort to flip it. And I think in some ways Mike Levin is the beneficiary of all that anger about Trump and determination to
Hold
flip.
that thought. We do have a bite from Mike Levin I want to get in here before we move on.
2 years ago, Chrissy and I started this journey running against a 9-term incumbent and the wealthiest member of Congress, Darrell Issa. And I don't want you to boo Darrell Issa tonight, because Darrell Issa gave me a call to congratulate me earlier tonight. Darrell Issa actually offered help with the transition, and for that I am grateful, because our country is more important than partisanship.
Well,
Scott?
I think what's interesting about, we have now 4 Democratic representatives representing San Diego region in Congress, 1 Republican. I think of the 4, he's probably in the most conservative district of the 4 Democrats, but he's now, I think, the most liberal member, or the most, pushes for a lot of things like universal health care. And so that'll be a very interesting discussion. There's already talk about people who may run against him in a couple of years. So he's going to be one of those guys that has to raise money constantly, has to really fight for it constantly. But he's also a hustler. I mean, I think voters can really sense when somebody hustles in their district. And I think that played out throughout the region, whether it's Myrtle Cole's district or D2. But in this one, he clearly out-hustled Diane Harkey there. It's a fascinating change, but it's something he's going to have to hold on to by the skin of his teeth.
I couldn't help thinking that the reason that Issa had congratulated him was because his win sort of justified Issa's decision to step down.
Right.
You know, if Harkey had won, then people might have said,
there was
why
that
did he step down?
Yeah, there was that bizarre moment where Issa wakes up in Election Day and says, well, this race was lost. And people hadn't even started voting. It's only been like an hour. It was like, well, I guess it was fascinating, but he really did want to prove that his decision was right.
Well, but part of it was also that I mean, you know, with all due respect to Diane Harkey, she was the wrong candidate for Republicans. She was tied to Trump. She's, you know, is a favorite of the NRA. And it's still, you know, a Republican district more nominally, but it's a suburban district. And those were in a coastal, and so, you know, it's a much more moderate, and those were the kinds of districts that were targeted by Democrats across the country. And it's sort of interesting because both the Democrats actually got the candidate they wanted. They wanted Mike Levin because of his politics, but also he's got political roots. He was the executive director of the Orange County Democratic Party, so he knows politics. He knows how to do this. The Democrats also wanted Diane Harkey because, as we were talking before the show, Assemblyman Rocky Chavez of Oceanside, a moderate Republican, Latino, former, I don't want to say former, but a retired Marine colonel, a really good fit for Oceanside, certainly. He was leading the early polls, so the Democrats targeted him, but not only them, certain conservative groups did. So because certain Republican groups, they want more of a purist, regardless of the fit for the district. And in the end, the Republican Party abandoned her weeks before the election because there was just no way she was going to win. They saw it.
She had baggage. We should just mention baggage
exactly.
because, you know, Applegate had some baggage, so that's why the Democrats were so relieved when Mike Levin won the primary. And Harkey had some baggage, and they pummeled her with it in the ads.
Well, let's shift over now to the one district you referenced, the Republican here in this county, Duncan Hunter, and he's headed for, before he goes back and does anything at all in Congress, there's a big trial looming.
Yeah, that's the most conservative district I've heard in the state. You know, it's very hard mathematically for a Democrat to win. There was obviously some racial and bigotry issues in the district that Amara Kempe-Najjar couldn't really overcome in some ways. But I think a lot of people simply made the decision there that they wanted to remain with a Republican. They would rather do that than wait 2 years through a Democrat, that if there truly are consequences to be paid for these illegal actions that he's accused of, then he'll pay for them, and they can choose somebody else of more fit for the district. But mathematically, it was just a real difficult race for Amara Kempe-Najjar.
And looking ahead, just look at the national situation here. Obviously, the Democrats take control of the House. They have subpoena power. They have investigative power. They're going to have chairman of these various committees that look into the president and check the president here. Big dynamic change in Washington.
Yeah, I think one of the big discussions is among some Democratic old hands, will they overplay their hand on the whole investigative front? Will they pick their spots, or will it just be that's the whole focus? I mean, there are things that have to be looked into, but they also won the election not just with Trump, but, you know, the health care was a big issue, and where do they go from there? You know, they were protective of the pre-existing conditions component of Obamacare. Well, they've got that now because that's not going to change. So where do they go? They're not going to move forward on Medicare for all, I don't think, right now. But is there the drug prices? Is that something they can actually work with Republicans on? And infrastructure is something that they're talking about. So it'll be interesting to see what actual issues other than opposing Trump they'll come up with because 2020 comes down the line, and Trump won't be the only issue people care about.
All right, we're about out of time, but 2020 has really already started right now. Allison, last word.
Well, I just wanted to say that Mike Levin did mention in his speech that he said now is the time to legislate and investigate, just like our founding fathers told us. So one of his mentors was Adam Schiff, who might become the head of the House Intelligence, which is just what Darrell Issa was.
All right, well, we're going to watch all of that, plenty to chew on as we go ahead in the weeks to come. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Scott Lewis of Voice of San Diego, Allison St. John of KPBS, Michael Smullins of the San Diego Union Tribune, and Amitha Sharma, also of KPBS News. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.